All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to ASMFC's Atlantic Striped Bass Management Board meeting. My name is Marty Gary, and I'm with the New York Department of Environmental Conservation, and I'm your board chair. Our vice chair is Megan Ware from the state of Maine. Our technical committee chair is Nicole Lengo-Costa from Rhode Island. Our AP chair is Lou Bassano from New Jersey, and our law enforcement representative joining us at the table is Jeff Mercer from Rhode Island. I'm also joined at the front table to my right by Tony Kearns and Dr. Katie Drew. We have one new member of the board. I'd like to acknowledge Ingrid Braun with the Potomac River Fisheries Commission. Welcome, Ingrid. And we'll go to our first order of business, which is approval of the agenda from the summer meeting. Hopefully everybody's had a chance to look at the agenda. Are there any additions, modifications, any changes to that agenda? Seeing none, the agenda is approved by consent. I'm sorry, for the agenda for today. The proceedings from the August 23 meeting, that will approve those. Are there any changes to those proceedings from the August 2023 meeting of the Striped Bass Board? Seeing none, that is approved by consent. We'll now go to public comment for items that are not on the agenda. And the way I'd like to do this, we have a 10-minute allocation on this for the public comment. So I'd like to see a show of hands both in the room that would like to make public comment on items that are not on the agenda, and also a show of hands online. And what we're going to do is we're going to calculate how many people want to make comment, and then we're going to divide up and allocate so we have fair allocation of time. So raise your hand in the room and online if you'd like to make a public comment for items not on the agenda. I'm not seeing anybody in the room.
I currently have 3 people, Michael Perry, Phil, and Tom Lilly. If there's anybody else that intended to do public comment, you have 10 seconds to get your hand up. All right, it's just 3, so.
Okay, so if 3 folks online would like to offer public comment, so I allocate 3 minutes per person. And our first one is Tom Lilly. Is that who we have, Tony? Okay, Mr. Lilly, if you can unmute yourself, you have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Me okay?
Yes,
Hello?
go ahead.
Am I coming through?
Yes, go ahead, Tom.
Okay. Good afternoon, members of the Striped Bass Management Board. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm going to start with a request. I'm going to ask you that the striped bass, that you refer the question of the failure of the young of the year in Chesapeake Bay to, I guess it would be your striped bass and the Menhaden technical committees to determine the cause of the 5-year-long now young of the year failure in Chesapeake Bay. And I guess you've looked at the reports for this year, and based on the decline in the last 3 years, it wouldn't surprise me to see us approaching 0 next year. In other words, it wouldn't surprise me to see the possible coming of the extinction of striped bass in Chesapeake Bay. You people from New York and New Jersey, at least we go by the reports that since Menhaden factory and purse seine fishing was put out into the ocean there, out into the U.S. Atlantic zone, there's been an amazing change in your charter and recreational fishing. Just unbelievable. And I think the people up there are all saying it's due to the fact you have so many Menhaden juveniles and adults there for the large and small striped bass to feed on. When you consider this request, consider that the Chesapeake striped bass fishing alone affects about 400 to 500,000 anglers, about 800 charter boat captains, and hundreds of those are going out of business. It affects about 500 food fishermen, about 300,000 fishing powerboat owners, and one forgotten group, about 2 million wildlife watchers in the 2 states, 400 marinas, and about 30,000 jobs. From the statistics we have in Virginia, there were about 600,000 fewer striped bass trips taken a year the last time that was accounted, and about $150 million a year less spent just by striped bass fishermen and local Virginia small businesses. So this is my request, that you refer this incredibly serious matter to the however it should be referred, to whatever committee it should be referred to. But I ask this, that the decision, you've been studying the relationship of these 2 species for at least 19 years now. There have been thousands of reports and studies made. So let's do this. Please recommend this based on the available science. And please move ahead with getting a decision made on the cause of this catastrophic failure in Chesapeake Bay. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Lilly, for your comment. Next, we'll go to Phil Zalsak. Go ahead, Phil, you have 3 minutes.
Chairman Gary, consider the following. Over 60% of the coastal stock of striped bass begin as spawn in the Chesapeake Bay and its tributaries. The mortality rate of striped bass is directly tied to the mortality rate of Atlantic menhaden. The higher the mortality rate of Atlantic menhaden, the higher the mortality rate of striped bass will be. The Atlantic menhaden reduction fishery allocation in Virginia is currently 67% of the total allowable catch for the entire Atlantic coast. That's over 158,000 metric tons, over 3/4 billion fish being removed from Virginia waters this year. Intense reduction fishing is currently during the same time when there is little migration of Atlantic menhaden in Virginia waters. That's called localized depletion. Currently, the reduction fishery has had the great difficulty finding menhaden in the Chesapeake Bay and at its entrance. The latest NOAA data indicates that the recreational harvest of striped bass in Maryland waters has declined 72% since 2016, and the Maryland Chesapeake Juvenile Index for the striped bass is at an all-time low. The decline of striped bass in the Chesapeake Bay is due to the lack of menhaden in the Chesapeake Bay. It is not due to overharvesting by recreational fishermen. Further evidence of localized depletion of Atlantic menhaden in the Chesapeake Bay was provided by Dr. Brian Watts of the College of William and Mary during his sworn testimony before the Virginia Marine Resources Commission on August 22nd. He stated the following: if you look at the relationship between reproductive rates of osprey over the last 40 years and Atlantic menhaden relative abundance index, they are directly related. To sustain the osprey population in the main stem of the lower Chesapeake Bay, the reproductive rate of osprey needs to be 1.15. The current rate is 0.1. That's a 91% decline in reproductive rate, and thousands of osprey chicks have died in their nest this summer in the lower Chesapeake Bay. In 2016, the Maryland GDP associated with the striped bass industry was $800 million and supported over 10,000 jobs. That is no longer true after a 72% decline in recreational harvest. By comparison, the reduction harvest industry in Virginia is supported by less than 1,000 jobs, with profits going to Canada. In 2020, Atlantic Menhaden Management Board reaffirmed the commitment to manage the fishery in a way that accounts for species' role as forage fish. That board has failed in that commitment. Further, I attended the Ecological Reference Point Working Group meetings 2 weeks ago and heard no discussion of striped bass mortality rate and its relationship to Atlantic menhaden. None. In the interest of conservation and sound fishery management, it's time to limit the Atlantic menhaden reduction fishery to federal waters. I request you advise that the Atlantic Menhaden Management Board take action as soon as possible to end this ecological disaster. I thank you for your time.
All right, thank you, Mr. Zalsak. Appreciate that. Our next commenter is Michael Pieri. Michael, you have 3 minutes. You can unmute your phone, your microphone.
I'm not nearly as prepared as the 2 former speakers. I I absolutely do agree with them. In my area of Connecticut, I am seeing very few bunker to support striped bass and their needs. We're right now in the middle of the fall run. I operate a 36-foot charter boat. I am not a guide service. I am a charter boat. I carry 6 passengers who like to harvest and eat striped bass. My passengers, I do consider to be underrepresented. They're not aware of the means to voice their opinions on striped bass. And currently today, we have beautiful conditions, light winds, no rain finally. And my boat is sitting to the dock because I do not have trips. There's 7 other charter boats in my harbor. They do not have trips, and 1 party boat as well. We have an abundance of striped bass just right 2 miles outside of the harbor. We have sea bass fishing. We have tautog fishing. We have everything right now, right in the middle of the fall run, and we cannot get our boats off the dock. This emergency action has really strong implications on our business. I'd say most will say 40 to 60%. It's impacting us greatly, us as operators and owners, our mates, their marinas, their mechanics, their fuel docks, local businesses, hotels, and delis. We all are aware that MRIP is now confessed to a 40% overestimate of angler effort, which might have really forced the hands of the emergency action. Today, I see all the documentation. I'm aware of the former meetings. I am asking everybody to keep us in mind when it comes for sector allowance for striped bass. 28 to 33 will get us closer to being on track to where we can be, and hopefully support our trips, bring our customers back, and support us getting off the dock.
Yeah, TJ.
I'm using one microcosm of Connecticut, but this is happening. Yes.
Michael,
Yes.
please. Some of the comments you're referring to are part of the agenda, and you'll have an opportunity if there's a motion. You're talking about some options that may be on the table for discussion today. So this is a comment period for just those items that are not on the agenda. So if you have just about 30 seconds, you could wrap up your comments. Thank you.
So I just ask everybody to consider this going forward today, and I will re-comment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. We had one other person raise their hand. It was TJ Karbowski. And TJ, there was 1 minute left. You came in a little bit late, but if you could keep your comment to 1 to 2 minutes, that would be great. You can unmute. Thank you.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I mean, I'm going to say my comments similar to Mike's, but right now specifically, I just want to speak about Bunker Menhaden. This year, I'm wrapping up my 20th season of doing this professionally. I've been fishing my entire life, but for a living, this is my 20th season doing this, and I can tell you unequivocally that the amount of large striped bass, and when I mean large, I'm talking like 25, 30 pounds and up, is 100% related to the amount of bunker that are in the area. In other words, you're not going to find a lot of 40-pound fish hanging around unless there's bunker for them to eat. And it's no small coincidence that you guys, or the Menhaden committee or whatever, raised the quota this year, and I have not seen a pot of bunker in months now. Months. The school size stripers, we'll call them whatever, 35 inches and lower, they don't mind eating all the small bait that's around because there's plenty of bay anchovies and silver sides and peanut bunker and all that stuff. They don't mind eating that. But whatever happened this year, and I'm not saying it's 100% omega protein, but it's an awfully big coincidence that you guys raised their quota. Then now we don't have any bunker around. Months. So I just want to put that on the record. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, TJ. Appreciate your comment. So before we go to the next item on the agenda, which is consider approval of draft addendum 2 for public comment, given the speakers that have weighed in, I just feel compelled to say, so many of you listening in from the public, and certainly the board members, have seen the juvenile abundance indices for Maryland and Virginia that were released late last week. Both states' 2023 index values were below the time series average. Maryland's even lower than Virginia's. The fishery management plan's management trigger for the juvenile index had previously been tripped, and the low recruitment regime is in use and will be used in the 2024 update to the assessment coming next summer. So for today's purposes, the board is considering measures to reduce F to the target for 2024. In the upcoming presentations, you'll hear a little bit more from Tony and Katie. They'll talk and clarify how we're using the juvenile abundance indices, and there's opportunities for board members to obviously ask questions, but we are trying to utilize the juvenile abundance indices to the best of our ability for those indices that we have. We'll go to our next item, which is going to be presented by our technical committee representative, Nicole, who is participating via the webinar, and she'll give a presentation on the technical committee report. And Nicole and Katie will take questions after the presentation. So I'll turn it over to you, Nicole.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Great. So today I'll be presenting on the spawning potential ratio adjustment for commercial maximum size options. I would first like to start by recognizing the technical committee for their work in completing this task, Dr. Gary Nelson for developing the template used by the TC, and Tony, Katie, and Emily for all of their support with this task. Next slide, please. I'll start today by providing a little background on the technical committee task, provide an overview of the methods for the SPR analysis decided on by the technical committee at their August 2023 meeting, review the results of the analysis, and then wrap up with some comments provided by the TC. Next slide. So by way of background, the board passed a motion at its August 23 meeting tasking the PDT with conducting a spawning potential analysis to determine quota reductions using 2022 as the starting point associated with each option in option sets D for ocean commercial maximum size limits and E, Chesapeake Bay commercial maximum size limits in draft addendum 2. Given the technical nature of the analysis and the need for state-specific analyses, the TC took on the charge of completing the analysis and discussed the analysis in detail and the methodology at their August 2023 meeting. Next slide. The analysis was run using the same methodology as the fish methods package in R, but with the additional optimization for the F increment to increase precision. Additionally, the template was a bit easier to use for the TC and eliminated the need for TC members to use R and RStudio directly. Several of the inputs for the analysis were taken directly from the most recent stock assessment, including spawning stock biomass weight to age, catch weight to age, the F target value of 0.167, having an age 15 plus group, the proportion mature at age, and age-specific mortality. Next slide. The analysis also required selectivity curves for each base option as well as each max size limit option. These curves were developed from state-specific age length keys where states pooled 2021 and 2022 data. If there were less than 10 links per age, states were allowed to borrow data from another year or a neighboring state to ensure a large enough sample size in order to estimate what proportion of each age class is legally harvestable under each option. Next slide. The results show that maximum size limits decrease the quotas for most states with active commercial fisheries. Both New York and New Jersey had quotas that increased from 5 to 49%, and this is due to their current quotas being based on a maximum size limit that is lower than the proposed options in the draft addendum. All other states had quotas that decreased from 5 to 26.9%. Next slide. The TC had several comments they wanted to raise to the board, including that without a quota adjustment, implementation of a maximum size will increase removals in numbers of fish. This is due to the fact that the average size fish is likely to decrease with the implementation of the maximum size. Additionally, the SPR quota adjustments attempt to maintain the same spawning potential under the new maximum size limits, so the management options remain conservationally equivalent to the status quo. Next slide. However, there are multiple sources of uncertainty with this analysis, including characterizing the change in selectivity that may be due to factors such as availability of fish and gear effects, commercial fishery behavior from the market and gear used or gear restrictions, and increased discards of oversized fish. Next slide. The technical committee understands the board's intent with this option is to protect larger fish, but the TC's earlier analysis on minimum size limits versus slot limits showed no benefit of protecting older fish in terms of the rebuilding timeline to the 2029 SSB. The overall effect of maximum size limit options is increased uncertainty around the rebuilding probabilities without positively impacting stock productivity or stock rebuilding. Next slide. And with that, Katie and I are happy to take any questions. And I would also just point out that the PDT memo, which we will be discussing later, does have some of the probabilities of rebuilding in there. And Katie will go over that in just a little bit.
Thank you, Nicole, for your report, and thanks to the technical committee for all its hard work. So we'll go to questions for Nicole and Katie. Thank you, John. It couldn't be that easy, right? John Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation, Nicole. The whole SPR thing, the basic idea is we're taking a quota that was developed in pounds and turning into numbers of fish, correct? And then converting back to pounds to reduce the quota. And I just want to make sure I'm understanding the last point there was that the TC is not recommending that we use this method. It's really not going to gain us anything, correct?
Yeah, so the TC is basically saying that the uncertainty it adds to the rebuilding probabilities may not be worth the, actually implementing the maximum size limit. And so when you're doing the SPR analysis, you're saying, given my current size limit and the new size limit, what quota adjustment do I have to make in order to maintain the same spawning potential? That's why we're saying they're essentially conservationally equivalent. So you're just maintaining the same spawning potential. You're not getting any credit for any quota reductions that might occur. And so there's just a lot of added uncertainty by implementing the max size limit, especially when you consider the potential increase in dead discards, which we point out in the memo in a little bit more detail. Those are not accounted for in this analysis.
Go ahead, John, follow.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd just like to say I'd be glad to see that maximum size limit go from the commercial options. Thanks.
All right, thank you, John. Any other questions on the TC report? Okay. Next up, Tony will give an overview of changes to the draft Addendum 2 document, including a review of proposed management options. Tony will include PDT and LEC comments as part of the presentation. At the end of her presentation, Katie will go over the projections in the PDT memo, and Katie and Tony will then take questions on the draft and the projections. So I'll turn it to you, Tony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just quickly, just to throw us for a small loop, I just wanted to put up on the screen the wave 1 through 4 harvest estimates for 2021, 2022, and 2023. So folks can see where we are so far in the estimates. I realize these are still preliminary. And if you look at the very last line, this is a % change from 2022. And for the coast-wide removals, which is your very far column on the right, we are about 25% down from 2022. And from our estimates, when we were thinking about the emergency actions and thinking about how much we potentially could be reduced from there, The low end was about a 13.3%. The high end was a 31%. So this is within that range. We recognize that this is just waves 1 through 4. Things can change in the future, but so it is within the range of what the TC had projected. All right. Mr. Armstrong looks like he has a question. Is that all right, Marty?
Go ahead, Mike.
Just a question. So this is the first 2 waves. Most of the states had no new rules in. So the reduction that we're seeing in wave 4 was probably greater than that number. Is that right?
The reduction calculations did account for the fact that the regulations did not go into place until wave 3 or wave 4. So that's already, this is the correct comparison.
Okay, good. That's thanks for the clarification.
Thank you, Mike. We'll go back to Tony.
Okay. Then we will move into the presentation of the draft addendum. So we'll go to the next slide. I'm going to start today's presentation with just a brief background on the changes that we made to the background section, go through the timeline, and then present the new options. So the first thing, here we are in October looking at this draft document to approve it for potential public comment in November and December of this year. And then the board would consider the document for final action in January of 2024. In August, the board removed consideration of recreational harvest season closures. We added options for commercial quota reductions, recreational for hire measures, and minimum requirements for states allowing filleting in the recreational fishery. The board also provided direction on a range of other commercial and recreational management options that were requested. Due to the additional time needed for the development of the draft addendum, we anticipate that final action will occur in 2024, and the implementation schedule may span both 2024 and 2025. So take that into account. When we talk about the reductions in the document, those are assuming that all of the measures get implemented at the same in 2024. I'll note that in the overview section, we did add information on the MRIP fishing effort survey to give context that to the public. I will not repeat what MRIP went over the other day, but I just will note that even if we were to assume that the striped bass recreational catch was overestimated by 30 to 40% over the time frame since MRIP has started, it would only change the scale of the biomass, but not the overall downward trend in the population that we've seen since 2010. And that while we may not have been harvesting as many fish in 2022, the scale would still be there. And whatever the number was, we would have likely doubled the harvest still. So addressing that extremely large jump in harvest would still have been necessary. Just as a reminder, the board initiated the draft addendum to address stock rebuilding beyond 2023. The measures in the document are designed to achieve a target from the 2022 assessment, and it also includes the ability for the board to respond via board action to the stock assessment update in 2024. The striped bass stock is subject to a rebuilding plan that requires the stock to be rebuilt to its spawning stock biomass by 2029. The most recent projections indicate that a low probability of meeting that deadline if the fishing mortality rate associated with the level of catch in 2022 continued. There was concern that the recreational and commercial management measures of Amendment 7 in combination with the availability of that strong 2015 year class to the fisheries would lead to similarly high levels of catch in 2024. This addendum considers measures to reduce the removals to the 2022 level to achieve the target fishing mortality rate in 24 and support stock rebuilding. So we'll move into the management options. Just as a reminder, there are projections that have been used to develop these management options. We use the same forward projecting methodology as is done in the assessment to estimate the removals needed to achieve the F target in 24 with a 50% probability. The projections were made using 2022 removals data and estimated the 23 removals accounting for the emergency action. A new selectivity curve was developed for the 23 emergency action to account for the lower selectivity of ages 7 through 9 in 2023 due to that narrower slot limit. Because the calculation of F target accounts for selectivity, the F target value was recalculated to incorporate this new 2023 selectivity, and the projection results indicate that we need a 14.5% reduction from 2022 removals to achieve the F target in 2024. Sort of a carryover from last time, but if there is only recreational measures done in this document, then that reduction would need to be 16.1. So for the recreational options that are in the document, the board will choose one option for each region, the ocean and the bay. Options for the recreational fishery are designed to reduce harvest to achieve the target F. While these options are not designed to protect a specific year class, they may offer some protection to one or more strong year classes. All the ocean options propose a change, except for status quo, obviously, propose a change to the slot limit's maximum size. A revision to the 28 minimum size for the lower bound was not considered given this long-standing nature of this measure, and in consideration of some of the environmental justice issues that have been brought up previously to the board. The range of options considers a wider slot limit for the for-hire mode to address concerns heard from for-hire operators about the potential for increased discards with narrower slots and a general desire for anglers on for-hire trips to harvest a fish. The impact of the wider slot on the reduction to be achieved is very limited due to the small contribution of the for-hire fishery in the ocean sector or in the ocean fleet. And the wider slot would provide less protection to the 2015 year class, which will be age 9 in 2024. I will note that in the PDT memo, the law enforcement committee recommended or commented on the simpler the regulations are, the more consistent the regulations are, the easier they are to enforce. So having a separate for hire measure makes it more complex and makes enforcement a little bit more difficult for them. Here are the 3 ocean options: status quo, the all mode 28 to 31, and the separate measures for the for-hire fleet, which is at a 28 to 33 inch, and the associated reductions with those. Let's sit on that for a sec. Okay. For the bay recreational options, all the bay options except for status quo propose a maximum size limit. Some options also change the minimum size limit or bag, in addition to have some more uniformity within the bay. Maximum size limits range anywhere from 23 inches to 26. Higher maximum sizes were not considered to provide some protection to the above average 2018 year class, which is coming into the bay in 2024. The range of options considers a higher bag limit for the for-hire fleet instead of a wider slot, as we saw in the ocean fleet. In the bay, for higher removals are about a fifth of the bay's total removals. So the impact of the higher bag limit on the reduction is somewhat larger than what we saw in the ocean fishery. So option B, the B set options apply a standard maximum size. The C set option applies a standard 20-inch minimum and then all of the maximum sizes. And the D set options apply a 19-inch minimum size and a 1 fish bag limit to all of the maximum size limits. And then the option E is what allows for the separate for hire 2 fish bag for the for hire fleet and a 1 fish bag for the private and shore anglers, and it is a 19-inch minimum size. I'll note that the reductions range anywhere from about 5% to up to about a 24% reduction. The PDT is recommending for equity between the ocean and the bay measures to remove any options that are less than of a 10% reduction or greater than a 20% reduction. And I just noted in red on each of these tables which of those options they are. I recognize these tables might be tricky to read. You can follow along in the document. These tables start on page 15 if you are looking at the document right now. So again, these are the consistent maximum size ranging from 23 to 25 inches. Next are the standard 20-inch minimum size with the range of maximum size limits. Here we have the 19-inch with the maximum size limits and the 1 fish bag. And next we have the separate for hire bag with the minimum of 19 inches. Okay. In addition, we added the recreational filleting at sea, or filleting, not necessarily at sea, filleting at sea or at shore. There are states out there that allow for filleting to occur. We have an option here in the document that states that do authorize this to make sure that your measures have certain standards and minimums in order to best enforce this action. There are recommendation, or it would be minimum requirements that states that have this have, that racks must be retained, skin would be intact, and possession limit of no more than 2 fillets per legal fish. And then the state should consider including language about when and where racks may be disposed of, specifically for each mode of fishing. We did not make specific recommendations here because some states, their townships have specific laws to how these can be disposed of, but we just want to make sure that there is language that tells the fishermen when it should be or where it should be disposed, but that the racks must be kept with the fillets once they are at dock. And this provides for much better enforcement. Moving on to the commercial measures. The proposed options in the document for both the ocean and the bay for the commercial fishery use both commercial quotas and commercial size limits. And they use the 2022 measures as the starting point. All commercial quotas are in pounds and all size limits are in total length. There are 2 types of options, quota reduction and maximum size. They are designed to achieve different goals towards rebuilding. A quota reduction reduces harvest towards achieving the target F, but does not aim to protect any specific year class. Commercial quota management provides for increased certainty with regards to achieving a harvest reduction in contrast to the recreational fishing options. However, a reduction in quota does not always translate to the same reduction in harvest. We'll get into that more in a minute. A maximum size limit protects larger and older fish, but aims to maintain the same overall spawning potential through the quota adjustments. So accordingly, changes to the commercial quota results from a maximum size limit are not credited towards the goal of achieving the F, as Nicole went over in her presentation. Additionally, there are areas of uncertainty associated with the spawning potential equivalency of this approach, as Nicole went over earlier in the TC's report. So all options in the document proposed, or in the commercial quota reduction, except for status quo, propose implementing a reduction for striped bass commercial fisheries in both the ocean and the bay. And the quota reduction would contribute to the goal of reducing removals to achieve the target. Option A is status quo, just maintain the current measures that we have. And option B is a quota reduction. That quota reduction can be reduced up to 14.5% from the 2022 quotas with their 2022 size limits intact. We note that reducing commercial quotas by a certain percentage is unlikely to achieve that percentage due to annual quota underages that tend to occur for reasons such as state regulations, market conditions, distribution shifts, and other factors that can affect fishing. In the past, this difference between the commercial quota and the harvest was much more pronounced, but in the table, you will see in 2022, the majority of the states with commercial fisheries fully utilized their quota. Therefore, the PDT anticipates that quota reductions will have the potential to impact those states a lot more than previous years when the quota was underutilized. So we actually may have realized real quota reductions in states with active fisheries. We will always continue to have underages if there are states that choose not to have an active commercial fishery, but they are allocated commercial quota. And then reducing quotas from the realized harvest levels is not considered, as it would amount to a quota reallocation, which is outside the scope of this document. This table is on page 19. I recognize it's quite small, but you can see those fisheries that achieved their 2022 quotas. And the middle column is what the maximum quota reduction would be under a 14.5%. All right, moving on to the commercial maximum size limit. All options besides status quo propose implementing a maximum size limit for both the ocean and the bay. The intention of this option is not to contribute to the goal of reducing removals to the F target, but preserving a larger fish that would contribute to the spawning stock biomass. As part of implementing a change in the size limit, the commercial quotas were adjusted to account for maintaining the same spawning potential as under its current size limits and quotas. Most state quotas would decrease to account for a lost spawning potential. However, some would increase. The percent change by state varies given the range of commercial size limits and fishery selectivity by state. These changes in quota will not be credited towards the addendum's objective of achieving the F. The proposed quotas were developed using the spawning potential ratio as Nicole went over. I'll just restate the TC's concern with the maximum size limit option, that the maximum size limit would likely increase dead discards of larger fish, produce levels of harvest that are not equivalent to the current quotas and size limits, and is likely not to increase the probability of rebuilding in 2022. The maximum size limit option has a potential for increases in quota that would exist in states that have current maximum size limits that are lower than the proposed max size limits. It should be noted that the SPR calculations for those states allow the quota to be increased to account for the harvest of larger fish. which would result in fewer total fish harvested relative to the lower maximum size limit. However, the fishery may not actually achieve the harvest of larger fish due to market demands, availability of larger fish, gear restrictions, or other limitations. And the bottom line here is that it has the potential to result in higher overall removals under a higher quota. So we have the options for the commercial maximum size limit. Option A, status quo, none. Option B has a range of different size limits, 38, 40, and 42 for the ocean. And option C are the bay. C1 is 36 inches from June 1 to December 31st, and 28 inches from January 1 to May 31st. And then option C2 is 36 inches for all the bay fisheries. This first table, which is on page 21 of the document, shows the quota changes for each of those maximum size limits of the ocean fishery. And this second table is the changes for the bay. I will note that these options are labeled incorrectly. E1 is really C2 and E2 is really C1. If this option stays in the document, we will fix that. Got out before we noticed. Okay. Next, almost done, we have the gill net exemption. For states that allow commercial striped bass harvest from gill nets, there was a request to have an exemption from the maximum size limit and instead put in place a maximum mesh size for the gill net fisheries because of the increased discarding that we potentially may see. I think it's 45% dead discards in the gill net fisheries. And so we wanted to try to make sure to not have those dead discards and provide option for this exemption. The first exemption is just a coast-wide measure that would allow for a gill net exemption, and a single maximum mesh size would be established. We would have to figure out what that coast-wide mesh size would need to be. We did not have enough time to do that prior to this document being released. If we did this, the states that utilize the gill net exemption would need to be able to discern between the fish caught in an exempted fishery versus the regular fishery. And they would do that through implementation plans. That could be having specific tags for these fisheries and other types of measures. The PDT is actually recommending that the board remove this option from the document, and it is because they're concerned that some states a coast-wide maximum mesh size may not fit every state's needs. Fish availability and net selectivity within a state has the potential to be different in their quick look. We saw that. And so the PDT is actually recommending that the gill net exemption be done through the conservation equivalency process so that each state can make sure that the maximum mesh size fits the need or fits the requirements of their state gill net fishery. It is not to suggest that we wouldn't allow the exemption. It's just so that we can make sure that the mesh size fits that state's fisheries properly. All right, so the option 3 is the gill net exemption through CE. The state would submit a proposal requesting the exemption. It would utilize the TC to help them, if needed, to figure out what that maximum mesh size would be. And within that proposal, they would also state how they would discern between the fish caught in the exempted fishery versus fish caught in a regular maximum size limit fishery. The last option in the document is the assessment response. This is to allow the board to take action if the stock is not projected to rebuild by 2029 with a probability of greater than or equal to 50%. Option A is that the board would just utilize the addendum or amendment process to make changes to the management program. As a reminder, addendums and amendments have a public comment process. The timing that measures would be implemented would likely be close to 2 years following the assessment by the time the document was developed and went out for public comment, and then the states implemented the measures within the document. Option B is this board can respond via board action following the assessment. This is a much faster process. It allows public comment during the board meeting, as well as public comment in writing prior to the meeting. It is much more expedited. We anticipate that if the board did action at a meeting, then it would be able to implement measures within 6 months, and likely for that 2025 season following the 24 assessment. And just as a reminder, what we're trying to do today is release this document for public comment. Emily is listening to us today. I think she would be very disappointed in me if I didn't put my best effort forward here. She will be back next week. Oh, and next, Katie will go over the projections that were in the PDT memo. And I just want to thank again all of the PDT members that the state has graciously given me to work on this document. Without them, I would be lost.
Great, thanks, Tony. So I'm going to discuss the striped bass projections that we did for Addendum 2. And I think before we get into them, I just want to stress right up front, these are not formal rebuilding projections. So there is still a lot of uncertainty in terms of what effort or removals or regulations or F rates will actually be from 2024 to 2029, including things like the effect of the new measures on selectivity. These projections also do not include uncertainty around sort of the estimates of those expected reductions for each option. We're really only presenting these to help the board compare across options that are currently under consideration. So when we do the assessment update next year, we will have more formal rebuilding projections, and that assessment update will help us get a better handle on things like what the effects of the emergency action are this year, as well as what kind of the selectivity we expect going forward. So again, this is just to help compare across these options under consideration and are not true rebuilding projections. So what I'm going to go over today are the projection methods, and then show you a quick overview of the results for the set of projections that looked at the probability of being at or below the F target in 2024 under different combinations of options, and then the probability of being at or above the SSB target in 2029 under those same combinations of different options. So next slide. So as a reminder, the terminal year of the assessment is 2021. So for the projections, the data that we need are the removals or the F rates that we are projecting over. We need information on recruitment, and we need information on population parameters like selectivity, weighted age, natural mortality, et cetera. Those parameters were taken from the 2021 assessment, with the exception of selectivity, which was modified to reflect the emergency action selectivity. That was, again, predicted outside of the assessment model, so another source of uncertainty. Next slide. So for the projections, so we know what the 2022 removals were. We have an estimate of the 2023 removals based on the calculations that we did under the emergency action regulations. And then for 2024, we have estimated the removals based on different combinations of options based on that estimated percent reduction. So if you recall, we have the option of either a 0% reduction in quota up to a 14.5% reduction in quota, and that could be combined with a set of options for the Bay, each of one of which has a different percent reduction, which could be combined with two different options for the ocean, which have different percent reductions. So combining all of those different regulations will get you a different set of reductions to go into these projections. And then for the SSB projections, which go out beyond 2024, we use the predicted 2024 F for 2025 to 2029. So what was our F in 2024 based on the first set of projections, and use that going forward. Next slide. So for recruitment, we used the observed values from the Maryland JAI in 2021 and 2022 to predict age 1 recruitment in 2022 and 2023. So it lagged forward 1 year. This graph is showing the Maryland JAI on the x-axis and the age 1 recruitment from the model on the y-axis. So you can see there's a very strong correlation between the Maryland index and the model's predicted recruitment. And we use that relationship to be able to predict the recruitment for 2022 and 2023 based on those observed values. So those low values of recruitment are in the projections as far as we have that data for. So next slide. In addition, for 2024 to 2029, we are drawing from that low recruitment regime. So if you recall, we did trigger the recruitment trigger last year, I think, with or at least for the most recent assessment update with the Maryland JAI. So the FMP requires that when we trigger one of these recruitments, we go from instead of drawing recruitment from that average, the solid dark bar, which is the average of basically the recovered stock full time series, we then draw instead from only the most recent low recruitment years. So those lower recruitment values are being used to project recruitment for 2024 to 2029. And the F target that we are trying to achieve in 2024 is also calculated using that low recruitment regime assumption. And so with that lower recruitment assumption, it means we need a lower F target in order to get to our SSB target because the stock is less productive. So we are folding in our observed recent low recruitment into these both short-term and long-term projections. Next slide. So I'm just going to give a quick overview of the results. The full table is in the memo that you received. And basically what we see is that the probability of F in 2024 being at or below the F target ranges from about 33% to 56%. And obviously the options with the higher percent reductions led to higher probability of being at or below the F target, which is intuitive. Next slide. So, and again, I'm going to talk about the SSB target, just repeating this slide because we do want to emphasize these are not formal rebuilding projections. This is just to help compare across options. But the results are similar to the F target probabilities, which is that the probability of the SSB in 2029 being at or above the target ranges from about 33% to 51%. And again, the options with the higher percent reduction led to a higher probability of being at or above the SSB target. We also did one run where F was equal to the F target. And so if we were able to maintain F target from 2024 to 2029, that had a 48% chance of being at or above the SSB target in 2029. So I think I have this in here again, just to end on this, to be fully clear, just for comparisons. But I think part of it is, it's hard looking at these different combinations of options with different percent reductions. None of these options that we are looking at actually achieve, or very few of them actually achieve the percent reduction that we need for according to the projections. And so that translates into we're not having a 50% probability of achieving our F target in 2024. And so what is that? We try to provide context about what that means under these different combinations going forward. So with that, I'm going to stop here. We can leave this slide up, but I'm happy to take any questions.
All right, thank you, Katie and Tony. So any questions from the board for Katie and Tony regarding the draft and the projections? We'll take those now. Okay, so we have Mike Armstrong, and then we'll go to Mike Louisi. Go ahead, Mike.
At the risk of being yelled at here. So when I look at the table and I say this certain combination has a 40% chance, that's just for comparison purposes. When we do the projection, that could turn into 75, it could turn into 20. Is that
Yeah.
correct?
That is correct.
Thank
So, and yes. But I guess related, but probably the combination. So if you looked at one option versus another option, one's 40, one's 38. Next time when we flip through them, when we do the full projections, okay, maybe one's 42 and the other one's 40, or one's 22 and the other one's 18. So to a certain extent, they are giving you like probably the relationship between the percentages is what's important, not necessarily what that exact number is, because the uncertainty, well, although there is still uncertainty about whether we will achieve that predicted reduction for each option, but the uncertainty about things like the selectivity and recruitment and the recent 2023 numbers is going to get folded in across all of those options for the next set of projections.
All right, go to Mike Louisi, and we have Dave Sikorsky online in queue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is to Tony. So Tony, you presented the different options, and you pointed out one particular instance where the numbers didn't align. It was either a cut and paste or some type of error that you said we're going to fix. I wanted to point out and just make sure that for the purpose of discussion, in the Chesapeake Bay recreational table options, I wanted to be clear, wanted it to be clear to the board that in the B, alternative set B, was it intended to have 25 inches for the maximum size for both B3 and B4? That should be 26, right?
It is. We didn't catch that one. Thanks, Mike.
Okay. And on the next page, under alternative set E, I believe E2 and E3 have a flip-flopped maximum size limit.
Correct.
Okay, just wanted to be clear. I scribbled in the new numbers. I just wanted to point that out for the purpose of discussion. Thanks. And Mr. Chairman, depending on how you plan to step through the document for thoughts and potential modifications, I do have a motion prepared to address the recreational Chesapeake Bay related options. So I'll hold off for now, but if you want to take that up at some point, I have a motion.
All right, thank you, Mike. Appreciate that. We'll go to Dave Sikorsky online.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm thinking through the portion of the presentation where we talked about the PDT's recommendation as it relates to the difference in quota reductions or landings reductions in the commercial fishery. I think the board will remember I talked about this and made a motion on the fly at the last meeting, which all relates back to what's in bold on page 11, which says we need to have a 14.5% reduction from total removals to achieve F target in 2024. I know Katie just said that very few of the options in this document are going to achieve that reduction. And so thinking about the Chesapeake Bay and a part of the document that says that 80% of numbers of fish removed in the commercial fishery come from the Chesapeake Bay, I'm not sure how, given that 14.5% reduction in quota is still more fish than what was landed in 2022. So I think we're missing an opportunity here to, one, give the public an opportunity to provide comment, and two, actually for this board to understand what is the right quota reduction for Chesapeake Bay to achieve the savings of numbers of fish. So I think there's my question. You know, what is the right quota reduction in Chesapeake Bay? And is it possible to include that in this document just to help people understand that? Because again, we have to reduce landings, and we just heard that this document may not do that. So is it possible to add that information in some way?
So I think one of the challenges with that is the way we have generally applied a reduction to the quota and seen that trickle down through the total removals but the key assumption there is that the utilization of that quota will be the same. So if we have, if we want a reduction, a 14.5% reduction from 2022 removals on the commercial side, then by reducing the quota 14.5% and assuming that utilization will be roughly the same, then that translates into a 14.5% removal in numbers of fish. So it's true that there is the possibility that if we fully utilized the quota, you would not get that 14.5% reduction. The Bay has generally come very close to utilizing their quota. The ocean tends to underutilize the quota because of, number one, the game fish status for a couple of states, and then number two, the lack of availability in ocean waters off of North Carolina means that North Carolina, which holds a fairly large chunk of the ocean quota, has not been able to harvest their quota. So theoretically, in the ocean, if we reduce the quota by 14.5% and that quota was fully utilized, then yes, we would not see that 14.5% reduction and might actually see an increase in removals. However, the problem that reduction is based on the utilization and what we expect to see in the future. So again, with the Bay, we generally see very high utilization. And so we could look at if the Bay 100% utilized their quota, how would that compare to the 2022 landings where there was a slight underutilization? And similarly on the ocean side, we could look at those numbers, but generally the utilization has not varied significantly. We do see some increases and decreases from year to year, but it's not a huge change over time, which is why that assumption is generally warranted compared to trying to reallocate quota to account for those differences in utilization.
Does that answer your question, Dave, or do you have a follow?
Yeah, it is helpful. Thank you, Katie. And yeah, there's a lot of thoughts, but I do have a follow-up also on the other piece of the puzzle when it comes to mortality, also thinking about the Chesapeake Bay. I may have missed this, but what have we been assuming about natural mortality in the Chesapeake Bay over recent assessments? Have we made any adjustments to that in recent projections? Because I'm thinking about blue catfish, I'm thinking about predation, how that relates to the unfortunate results 5 years in a row now of young of year, and so I recognize young of year is probably a starting point for our understanding of abundance, and then there's a selectivity and we're applying it appropriately, I would hope. Could you expand on a little bit of how natural mortality is applied, and then if it's changed in the face of this growing abundance of this invasive species?
So the natural mortality that we use is an age-specific natural mortality. So it's higher on the younger fish and then declines over time so that the oldest, largest fish have a lower natural mortality. But it does not change over time within the model. So every year we're assuming natural mortality is the same. We did explore during the last benchmark using a changing natural mortality for the Bay based not so much on the predation issue, but on the mycobacteriosis issue. And as you know, that spatial model did not get approved. And so that kind of was not fully brought into management or assessment use at this time. In terms of the blue catfish issue, I think we have not generally done a lot with that relationship. I think they certainly have the capability of eating juvenile striped bass, but I would say that that would go obviously into the juvenile index when they're age 0 and show up as low age 0 recruitment, as opposed to natural mortality within the model where we start modeling them at age 1. I think, the other component of it is, the mycobacteriosis issue, which seems to have gone down or receded in recent years. It's not as much of an issue as it was previously, possibly related to abundance or density within the Bay. So we could certainly look at the overlap of blue catfish with juvenile striped bass, but we think that those striped bass low recruitment values are probably more related to environmental conditions like temperature, flow. We had a very dry summer, and we've had several very dry summers recently, which can reduce the survival of those young of year, as well as the overlap with their plankton prey. We know these are all things that can affect juvenile recruitment. So blue catfish may be part of it, but there are also known environmental drivers that are currently not favorable for striped bass recruitment. So hopefully, I hope that helps. Thanks.
Extremely helpful as always. Thank you, Katie, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Dave. Additional questions on the draft or the projections? Doug Rauch.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to turn to the page 19 and the quota options, the quota reductions options, and just get some full understanding of a couple things. What I'm looking at is under option A, status quo, amendment 7 quotas and size limits, that, and comparing it to option B, where we would take a 0% reduction. I see in the New England states, as I would logically expect, there'd be no change in the quota, but in that, and also the same thing with North Carolina, but in all the other states, looking at New York, option A quota, for example, is 652,000 and some change, but under a 0% reduction, under option B, it's 640,000 pounds. And, you know, Maryland, for example, or the Chesapeake Bay quota under option A is, you know, almost 2.6 million, but under option B, 0% reduction from 2022. It's over 3 million. So could I just get some understanding about why there's some variability and changes there?
Doug, I believe it's from the conservation equivalency programs that are not shown but can continue forward. And so in the options, the B options, they would not be there at all. It would be just straight up from their amendment 7 quotas. But in the current quotas, CEs are accounted for.
So for example, New York has a maximum size that lets them, that gives them a little extra quota to account for the fact that they're harvesting smaller numbers of fish or smaller individual fish, et cetera. So like those calculations are not included in certain places.
All right, thank you, Doug. Additional questions on the draft and projections on the board? Nobody online, Tony? Okay. All right, so the next step is to go to board deliberation. The way I like to handle this is to go through recreational measures first. So we'll go by sector, starting with recreational, and I'd like to start in the Chesapeake Bay, and to kind of keep things moving, because I know a lot of board members have had discussion and have some motions teed up. We'll go to Chesapeake Bay, and I know, Mike, you had a placeholder for that, so I'll turn to you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I sent a motion to Tony. I'll wait for it to come up before I read it. And I guess while they're getting that ready, oh, here it is. Why don't I'll read it into the record, Mr. Chairman, and then there may need to be some explanation. I'll hold off on comments, and if we get a second, then I can explain a little further what my thoughts were in drafting this and putting it together. So I'd like to move to remove from section 3.1.2 Chesapeake Bay recreational options of draft addendum 2, alternative set B, B1 through B4, alternative set C, C1 through C4, and E4. And if I get a second, I can speak to the reasons why those were selected for removal.
All right, thank you, Mike. Is there a second to this motion? Pat Gear. Okay, Mike, back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. And so in review of the options for the Chesapeake Bay, the states took a look at the draft that was put together by the PDT, and in the desire through this challenge to try to find some uniformity within the Bay, we felt that achieving a minimum size and a maximum size, having a similar slot limit with all four jurisdictions in the Bay would be an excellent way to move forward. Right now, we have different minimum sizes. We have three different minimum sizes in 4 different jurisdictions. And so our focus was to establish that uniformity first. And by considering that, that essentially removes alternative set B if we didn't want to leave in place what we currently have, which are a number of different minimum size requirements for the jurisdictions in Chesapeake Bay. So alternative set B was the first one we decided probably didn't need to continue to stay in a draft addendum 2. Alternative set C sets a 20-inch minimum size limit throughout the Bay. And some of the issues there would be for the jurisdictions, Maryland and DC, would need to increase their minimum size limit to 20 inches. We've been there before, and the number of fish that were released by having a 20-inch minimum size in our portion of the Bay was incredible. And we worked really hard to get ourselves back to 19 inches to try to reduce some of that dead discard mortality that was occurring, which I know is of interest to everybody around this table. So that was the reason for alternative set C. Alternative set D was not mentioned here. I believe alternative set D provides a 1 fish bag limit at a 19. It's very uniform across the board. And lastly, for E4, E is the alternative that allows for the split modes. And based on the recommendation from the technical committee, I felt since E4 was of the lowest, it was the lowest amount of reduction that we could achieve at 5.5%, something like that. I felt that that was not an acceptable option to take to the public. Now, I just mentioned the technical committee, and I know the technical committee was suggesting that we remove options that are greater than a 20% reduction and less than a 10% reduction. However, I feel that in light of what we're faced with and the challenges ahead, and the juvenile index being what it has been for 5 years, and a whole list of other things that I won't waste the board's time discussing, I felt that maintaining those the options that have higher levels of reduction would be something that I would like to hear the public's feedback on, which is why I limited the removals to those options that are less than 10%, leaving only one in there, which is option E3, that does not achieve the 10% reduction. However, I would be comfortable when and if this goes out as recommended here through this motion, that when the hearings occur, that staff with ASMFC, when they present this information, specifically say that option E3 did not meet or was not recommended by the technical committee in moving forward, just to put it out there. But I really do want to get the feedback from the public. And I think this, by supporting this, it provides a broad distribution of maximum size limits with uniformity still. And I think we'll get the feedback we need in the Bay to make the decisions we do in final action. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thanks for your rationale, Mike. Pat, as seconder, do you want to add any comments?
I'll just add that, you know, it's, if you look at our regulations in the Bay, we're all over the place. We have different seasons and different size limits, and this is a good start to have a consistent slot limit. And, I've said, we met last week and I said, how do we ever get to this point where we were so, variable between the states? And, it happened because of conservation equivalency over a number of years. But I think this is a good start to try to have some consistency, having that slot limit be the same for all jurisdictions would be, very helpful to our anglers because some of them are fishing right across borders. So I'm very supportive of that, and I agree with everything Mr. Luisi said.
All right, thank you, Pat. All right, we have a motion on the floor. I'll open it up to board discussion. Any comments on the motion? Oh, okay, Doug. No, almost going, but you got it.
I'm sorry, I couldn't let it go, Mr. Chair. I'd like to put up a motion to amend to include option E to remove option E3 too. I look at this as a 7% reduction. We've got to be getting as close as we can to this, and most of these options, both this and in the coast, at least on paper, don't quite make it. There are some that go over here in the Bay, but I think in my, I would like to see option E3 also removed if I get a second.
All right, thank you, Doug. Is there a second to this motion? Mike Armstrong. And back to you, Doug, for your rationale.
Yeah, as I said, my rationale is we need to get as close as we can to this 14.5% reduction. And this is half of that. I really appreciate the efforts that Maryland and Virginia have put forward to try and pare this down. I support it completely, but I am having difficulty supporting having an option for only a 7% reduction. So.
All right, thank you. Mike, any additional thoughts?
Not so much, but I don't think we should bring to public hearing anything that we think has such a low probability of succeeding. I think 7% is low enough that it just won't fly. So I can support taking that out.
All right, thank you. So we have an amendment to the original motion. It's on the floor and open for board discussion. I'll go to Pat Gira first.
When we did addendum six in 2019, we brought the sector separation before our commission, and they didn't want to hear anything about it. So I can't guarantee that Virginia will be. We may not do sector separation. We may continue to do one fish per person. So there will be, if that happens, there'll be additional savings. So I don't know we have a new commission that's drastically different than our past one, but when we brought that before them and said we're willing to accept the sector separation to give the charter for higher fleet 2 fish, they said nope. Unanimously, they voted against that. So.
All right, thank you, Pat. Mike Luisi.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not going to try to come up with an example off the top of my head, but I don't necessarily agree with the statement that every document we send out, the options that are in those documents are things that we're all willing to support. I think sometimes we put information out there to provide a range of options for consideration. And as I mentioned in my rationale for the motion, not the amended motion, but the original motion, I personally would like to hear from our stakeholders to determine whether or not their interest is more in just saving themselves for 1 year or saving the species into the future. I really want to get, and I think by presenting one of these options that I know for a fact our charter fleet is really interested in because of the sector split, I really want to see if their focus is all about the largest slot limit, or are they going to be thinking in any way about setting up themselves up for success for the future? As I mentioned, I'd be happy with, putting a footnote on that option to say that it wasn't supported by the TC. Secondly, I think is as good a time as any to bring to the attention of the board that in light of the emergency action, the failed recruitment or low recruitment in Chesapeake Bay for the last 5 years, we are working internally as of when that information became available. We are going to be considering actions in addition to the actions of ASMFC. One of those actions is the elimination of our spring trophy season altogether. And we also are contemplating moving forward with additional time periods in the summer when we have our no targeting restrictions. We're considering extending that. So we're beginning that discussion with leadership, but I do believe that we'll be taking additional steps to protect and conserve what we have left in the Bay. So I'm not going to support, for those reasons, I won't support the motion, but again, I ask that you support the original motion. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mike, for that context. Additional discussion from the board regarding the amended motion. Mike Armstrong.
It sounds like to me that I guess this comes down to you want the 25-inch as the top of the slot, whereas the coast option is 5 inches maximum slot. That's all that's proposed for the for-hire fleet, and that would be 24 inches in the bay if we apply it to 19 inches. So I continue to support that 7% is too low, and it gets you a pretty decent slot still of 5 inches if we go with E2.
All right, thank you, Mike. Additional discussion? All right, so we'll be ready to call the question. Can we have a 1-minute caucus appropriate for everyone? Give you 1 minute. All right. Let's call the question. I need to read it. No. All right, we'll just go ahead and go for it. All those in favor of, oh, sorry. Go ahead, Justin, you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can we possibly get like 30 more seconds to caucus? Sorry, we weren't quite done over here.
Yes.
Thank you.
30 more seconds.
Much appreciated.
All right. Let's go ahead and call the question on the motion to amend. All those in favor, please raise your hand and please hold them up. Tony will count. All right, thank you. Lower your hands. All those opposed to the motion, please raise your hands. All right, thank you. Abstentions? Null votes. The amended motion passes 10-6-0-0. We're back to what we'll have in the adjusted motion. We'll have in a moment. All right, is there a need to caucus on this, or can we go ahead and call? Anybody have a burning need to caucus on this? All right, we're going to go ahead and call the question on the motion on the floor. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Keep them raised as Tony counts them.
That's unanimous.
Okay, just to be sure. Abstentions, up to you guys, lower your hands. All right, no null votes. All right, it's unanimous, the motion passes. All right, John's keeping us straight up here. So, all right, well, Justin, question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Not a question, but now that we've dispensed with this motion, I was prepared to offer another one if you're ready for another motion.
You beat me to it, Justin. So this would be recreational measures, Chesapeake Bay. I was going to finish in the Bay first, if we could.
Okay, is that fair enough? That was my motions for ocean recreational.
Okay, so I'll go to you first when we pivot to the ocean. Are there additional measures on the Chesapeake Bay recreational options, either removing from the document or adding to the document? So the last call for Chesapeake Bay recreational measures. Okay, so, all right, Justin, was easy enough. Back to you. We'll go to the ocean recreational measures, and you have a motion to offer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I sent in the motion to staff, so hopefully we can put it up on the board. Okay, move to add the following options to section 3.1.1 ocean recreational fishery. Option D, one fish at 30 to 33 inches with 2022 seasons, all modes, 12.8% overall reduction, 45% harvest reduction, and 2% increase in release mortality. Option E, one fish at 30 to 33 inches with 2022 seasons for private vessel shore anglers, one fish at 28 inches to 33 inches with 2022 seasons for the for hire mode.
All right, thank you, Justin. Is there a second to this motion? Joe Semino. All right, Dr. Davis, back to you for your rationale.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chair. So my motivation here, at the last meeting, we considered a draft addendum document that had a lot of options in it for the ocean recreational fishery. And at that meeting, we voted to essentially take almost everything out. All that's left in there at this time is the 28 to 31 inch slot limit and the status quo FMP standard 28 to 35. I think the reasons we did that at the last meeting were good. I won't rehash that whole discussion, but I walked away from the meeting feeling somewhat unsatisfied. The reason being, this last year, when I talked to members of my public who were upset about the emergency action we took last year, they were upset about the unilateral nature of the action, that there was no public input. What I told them was I stood by that decision. I think this board did the right thing given the information we had at hand, but that I understood the criticism about the nature of that action. I think that's valid. And so my message back to the public was, for 2024, we will do our normal process, our normal deliberative process. We'll have public input. We'll present options to the public to achieve our objectives. Currently, the way the addendum stands, from my standpoint, there are not really options in there for the public to choose from for the ocean recreational fishery. So what I'm trying to do here is just add some options back into the document. The 30 to 33 inch slot, option D, achieves a 12.8% overall reduction on paper compared to the 14.1% reduction for the 28 to 31 inch slot limit. From my standpoint, given all the uncertainties and the projections, that's a distinction without a difference. They're roughly equivalent. That slot limit will expose some more of the 2015 year class to harvest. Based on table 4 and page 34 of the addendum, those 2015 fish will be on average about 34 inches long this coming year. So, this will still protect some significant portion of the 2015 year class, but will also provide some protection to the 2017 and 2018 year class, which should be on average 29 inches and 26 inches respectively next year. And then in option E, what I'm doing is just adding essentially an analog to option C in the document, providing an option for a for hire mode split to go along with this 30 to 33 inch slot limit. I don't have the percent overall reduction associated with this option. I did not do my homework. I was supposed to do that before this meeting and did not do that. But I think, if you look at the comparison between option B and option C in the document, which is the 28 to 31 or the 28 to 31 with the mode split, it's a 14.1 versus a 14.0% reduction. I think it's safe to assume the difference in the overall reduction between these two options is going to essentially be negligible, but we can calculate that and put it in the document after the fact. So again, the motivation here is just to add some options back in for the public to consider for the ocean recreational fishery. What I'm hoping we can avoid here is getting into a debate about the relative validity or which of these options would be most appropriate for 2024. We have plenty of time to do that at final action time if we vote these into the document. So I think at this point, I'm just hoping the board will acquiesce to adding these options into the addendum. Thanks.
Thank you, Justin. Joe, any additional thoughts as seconder?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. I agree with everything Justin said. I am kind of worried taking this out to the public without what we promised them, a chance to look at something other than what we put in as an emergency. I've had a chance to look at at this size range with the same tools that the technical committee uses. And I agree that it does. I do believe it provides protection to the two most important year classes that we're trying to protect. And I think it's something of value to see what the public opinion is on something other than the current option. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Joe. So we have a motion is on the floor, and I'll open it up to board discussion. Any of the board members like to comment on the motion on the floor? Dr. Armstrong.
I don't love the thought of a 30-33. We did a 28-31 to get off the 2015, and now we're following it. So that doesn't make all that much sense. I would like to hear what the public has to say, but I guess if I could go through the chair and ask the motioner, what does E achieve that C doesn't?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, so, I think in one sense, E doesn't achieve anything different than C. It's just the way the document is constructed. It sort of has distinct options for the 28-31 slot versus a 28-31 slot with a for-hire mode split. I think the options could be reconfigured in such a way as to provide, option A, status quo, option B, 28-31, option C, 30-33, and then sort of like I don't know what you call it, an option D to provide a 28-33 inch mode split to go along with either C or B. I think I got that right. So it's really just semantics and how the options are structured in the document.
That answer your question, Mike? Yeah. Additional discussion on the motion. Emerson Hasbrook.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I support this motion. I came away from the August meeting just thinking that what are we offering the public in this addendum for the ocean recreational fishery? It's essentially the way it's structured now. What we're offering them is what we put into place during emergency action. So I think having a couple of additional options is a good idea to get public input on that.
Thank you, Emerson. Additional discussion. All right, and no hands online, no hands in the room. Let's go ahead and yeah. So just to be clear for all those listening in from the public, there will be public option to comment on this. We're just adding it to the document to give the public additional options per the rationale that was provided. So we're going to go ahead and call the question. I'll give you a 2-minute caucus. All right, if everyone's ready, let's go ahead and call the question for the motion on the floor. All those in favor, please raise your hands. And again, please hold them so Tony can. Oh, all right. Let's do it this way. Is there any objection to this motion? We have somebody. Okay. All right, so Chris did. Okay, so we'll start again. All right, let's try again. All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hands. Hold them.
All right, I'm gonna, and just so everybody knows, everyone's clear, for the main motions, I'm gonna say the names of the states. Amendments, I am not going to unless the board asks for it. A roll call. New Hampshire, Maine, Delaware, Maryland, PRFC, DC, Virginia, Pennsylvania, Fish and Wildlife Service, New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and NOAA Fisheries.
All those opposed?
North Carolina.
Abstentions? Null votes. That's all. Okay. Motion passes 15-1-0-0. All right, we'll continue on pathway of ocean recreational options, either to remove or to add. Do we have any additional motions from members of the board? Dr. Armstrong.
I have a motion that would apply to both the bay and in the coast, if that's okay.
It is.
And this is addresses, because we have mode splits in, I'd like to put this in for clarification, and I'll stop at that and then speak a little bit more.
All right, we're looking to pull this up.
So I'll read it in. Yeah. So move to specify that any for hire mode specific limit optioned in section 3.1 recreational fishery management applies only to patrons during a for hire trip, captain and crew during a for hire trip are subject to the private vessel shore angler limits.
All right, thank you, Mike. Is there a second to this motion? John Clark. And Mike, back to you.
This was brought up at the PDT and there was discussion. I know law enforcement didn't love it because it's in the weeds. The effect will be small, but what we're doing here is splitting modes, which is really a huge move if we do it. Is we're doing it for the for hire fleet to attract clients. That's what I've heard. And it's not fair that the captain and crew could also take advantage of that, because that's not the purpose of why we're splitting the mode. And it's as simple as that.
All right, thank you, Mike. John, additional thoughts?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, I think Dr. Armstrong explained it all eloquently and succinctly.
All right, the motion is on the floor for discussion on the motion.
I didn't go over this section of the PDT memo just because we had pulled the patron aspect out. Mike did say that it is discussed. I just want to make sure to point to the law enforcement committee's thoughts on this, and that I'll take it to the bottom line if Jeff wants to go further. But for them, the patron standard would require law enforcement to additionally prove that the angler was a paying customer and not a part of the crew. And I think that was their biggest concern. The rest, and a significant portion of the other aspects of the law enforcement committee's discussion of this was about just consistent, straightforward language. You could apply that to this, or you could apply that to mode splits in general. So I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Tony. Jeff, any other thoughts?
Yeah, I guess this is essentially a mode split within a mode split. So like you said, we're really getting in the weeds here. Wouldn't be a problem in a boat with a captain paying customers, captain, one crew paying customers. But when you get some of the party boats with multiple crew, it becomes difficult to identify who's crew, who's paying. And it just adds another step in having to prove employment status. And proving that would be very difficult if someone denies being crew.
All right, thank you, Jeff. And we have our first board member who'd like to weigh in, and we have Dave Sikorsky online. Go ahead, Dave.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. While I appreciate how this provides some clarity, I think hearing what law enforcement has said, and it means, you know, that I don't think this is necessary, and I want to speak against the motion, largely because I think sector separation, as we've discussed and deliberated beyond this board, you know, thinking about it commission wide, we still don't have answers to. And the fact that we're looking at a stock that is collapsing and considering carve outs regardless of the reason is a mistake. Any further sector separation is a mistake. I do recognize the need for public comment on this issue. So I'm not, you know, it's not one of these things I'm going to try and get in a fight over here, especially virtually. But I think it's sending the wrong signal. We're in a time of conservation. I already spoke and asked some questions of staff to help understand how we can achieve that, because we know this package so far does not include everything we need. So I think this is a bit of a fool's errand, regardless of how much certain portions of the public need it, because I do respect that, and I am concerned for everyone that's connected to this fishery. But where do we stop with the carve outs? And it's as simple as going back to the numbers of fish, where we are, and how we're regulating in my Chesapeake Bay, or the Chesapeake Bay that I am part of representing, and where I live. And unfortunately, for the last 3 years, sector separation has allowed a portion of our recreational fishery to take twice as many fish as the general public. We see the FES numbers. We've been on a roller coaster ride with rec data over the last couple of years. We don't have clarity on this fishery to try and chop this up as if it's a precise tool. And I think we need to stop kidding ourselves at some point. How quickly do we want to race to the bottom is how I'm looking at this sector separation piece across the board. Frankly, I don't even think sector separation belongs in the Chesapeake Bay options, but I do want public comment. So this is a decision point for our once public comment is complete, but I definitely want to take this opportunity to say that it's a mistake if we move this forward. I do recognize the political pressure here and ask the public and ask all my fellow board members, do we want to get there twice as fast? Because that's what 2 fish versus 1 fish does. Our data is not accurate enough to do this. We shouldn't do it as we continue to have recruitment failure. We're racing to the bottom. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Dave. Go back to the board for additional discussion. I'll go to Roy Miller and then John Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I support this particular motion regarding what David just talked about, mode splits. This isn't a specific action that approves or disapproves of mode splits. This just tells us that if mode splits are selected from the draft, then this would apply to those mode splits. So for that reason, I would support this. I don't think we're not voting on mode splits by approving this particular motion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Roy. We'll go to John Clark, and then we have Megan Ware and Doug Grout.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I certainly understand the law enforcement concerns about this, and I don't like getting into regulations that can't be enforced. But at the same time, I think this does have a deterrent value, and that it would at least make clear to anybody that is a for-hire captain that they are not to take extra fish out there. And I think it's good just to have it out there, even if it would be difficult to enforce. Thanks.
Thank you, John. Megan?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm going to speak against this motion. I think for anything that's not enforceable, we're kind of losing the conservation value of what we're trying to achieve here. And for states who do have stakeholders who are interested in a for-hire split, this makes that option less palatable for me with this language included.
Thank you, Megan. Doug?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just would like some clarification on this motion, because I too have a little bit of heartburn considering the concern that law enforcement had put forward about the enforceability. I don't have a problem with this being added as a option, but if we do select a mode split, could we have an option where this isn't automatically part of it, part of a mode split, that we can choose as a board to either have it in or have it out? Or could we come to final determination, decide on a mode split, and ask to remove this part?
Doug, if that is what you're looking for, then we'd have to make a motion to amend to make it an option to add instead of replace. So I'll, if you want to do that, I can work with you to write an amendment.
Doug, let me come back because it sounds like you might want to go that route, but we'll go to Justin first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So a couple things. I'll just mention that Connecticut currently has regulations on the books like this for scup and black sea bass during our for-hire bonus seasons for those species. Paying passengers only are allowed to take the higher bag limit. That's what it says right in the regulations. And I haven't heard from our enforcement that that's a problem. So just pointing out that Connecticut has rules like this currently on the books. I I also just wanted to point out that, I don't see, this motion isn't about whether or not we're going to have 4 higher mode splits. It's about if we have 4 higher mode splits, might we also want to adopt some additional language that enhances conservation. So I think, to me, the conversation is getting a little jumbled around the benefit or not of having 4 higher mode splits. And to me, that's not what this motion is about. I'll also just say that I think Doug makes a good point that the way this is currently worded says that if this gets voted up and we have a 4 higher mode split, this has to happen. But I think it should be set up to be sort of a secondary set of sub options to go along with the mode splits. Thanks.
Doug, I'll go back to you if you intend to amend.
Now, my motion to amend is to remove the words "to specify" and replace it with "to add an option that any for hire modes." Is that clear?
All right, thank you, Doug. We have an amended motion. Do we have a second to the second? We have a second by Emerson Hasbrook. So Doug, I'll go back to you if you want to expand on your motion.
Yes, I heard what the law enforcement report is, and their concern with this. I have a little bit of hesitance. I'd like to have this as an option that we can select or not select in the final document, rather than have it just specified that it's going to happen.
All right, thank you, Doug. And Emerson, as seconder, would you like to comment on the amended motion?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I would rather see this as an option to be considered rather than a specific condition if we go with a mode split. So I agree with Doug on that. And also, if it's been working in Connecticut on black sea bass, was that what it was? It was black sea bass and scup, without any serious problems, then it seems like that might work as well with striped bass. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Emerson. So we have an amended motion. Discussion on the amended motion. Mike Louisi.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I support the motion to amend. Given the discussion around the table, I don't want to see this concept coupled with the for hire options for the recreational fishery when we come to final action. So I think this sets us up nicely. We could make our decisions first and then decide if we want to apply this, if any for hire mode split options are considered as final action at our next meeting. So I support this. Thanks, Marty.
All right, thank you, Mike. Additional discussion? Mike Armstrong.
I have absolutely no problem with this amendment. And if there's an easier way to do that, I think we learned that there's no such thing as friendly amendments. So vote 2 yeses.
All right, thank you, Mike. Any additional discussion before we call the question? Go, caucus, yes. All right, let's caucus. Let's try 1 minute. All right, let's bring this amendment to vote. We'll call it, actually, let's try this. Is there any opposition to this amended motion? Okay, okay. All right, so let's take it to a full vote. All those in favor of the amended motion, please raise your hands. All those opposed?
It was down. It was voting for.
Abstentions? Null votes. The motion passes 13 in favor, 1 opposed, 2 abstentions. So we're back to the original motion, or back to the modified motion. Okay, we'll read this into the record. Move to add an option that any for hire mode specific limit optioned in section 3.1, recreational fishery management applies only to patrons during a for-hire trip. Captain and crew during a for-hire trip are subject to the private vessel shore angler limits. And I'll try it the easy way. Is there any objection to the motion? No? Okay, so we're gonna go to full vote. All right, I tried. All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand.
New Hampshire, Delaware, Maryland, PRC, DC, Virginia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, Massachusetts.
All those opposed, please raise your hand.
Rhode Island and Maine,
Abstentions?
U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and NOAA Fisheries.
No votes. Motion passes 12 in favor, 2 opposed, 2 abstentions. And we are back to the draft and looking for any sections to add or any deletions on recreational ocean measures. So looking to the board for any motions related to additional additions to the document or deletions. See none, let's pivot to commercial measures. And I'd look to Dr. Davis for a first motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I sent a motion to staff. Wait, yep, there we go. So I move to remove section 3.2.2 commercial maximum size limit options and 3.2.3 gill net exemption options from draft addendum 2.
Sorry, Emerson, John Clark almost jumped over the table, so he's got the second. Beat you too. So, all right, so we have a motion on the floor from Dr. Davis, seconded by John Clark. And Dr. Davis, I'll come back to you to speak to your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I think at this point, it's pretty clear this is the best path forward. We have a pretty clear signal from the technical committee and the PDT that due to all the uncertainties associated with the analyses that went into creating the maximum size limit options and sort of some of what I think were maybe unanticipated outcomes where imposing a maximum size limit might actually increase removals, move us further away from our goal of rebuilding by 2029. I think it's clear at this point we should probably take this out of the document. I will say that I think there was a lot of value in having this in the document to this point and having the technical folks take a really good hard look at it. Since we implemented the slot limit back in 2019 or 2020, I've consistently heard from folks in the recreational sector concerns about equity, that folks in the commercial sector could still take larger fish while people in the recreational sector couldn't. I think by taking a hard look at this, we've been able to show that it's just not that simple. Imposing a maximum size limit on the commercial fishery just doesn't make sense for a lot of reasons. I would like to advocate for, if this motion is voted up, that we retain some text in the draft addendum that sort of synopsizes the work that was done, the main conclusions, and then sort of like provides that information to the public that they can review in the draft addendum. So it's in there sort of memorialized that we took a look at this and here's the reasons why the board didn't move forward with it, so that that work won't be lost and we won't be back here having the same conversation 4 or 5 years from now. Thanks.
Thank you, Justin. John, I'll turn to you for any additional thoughts.
Thank you. I think Justin covered that well. I have to say philosophically, I just haven't liked this whole SPR methodology for taking 1972 to 1979 landings, which were just in pounds, turning it into fish, then turning it back into pounds. It seems like alchemy of the type, and I'm just glad it's out of the document. Thanks.
All right, thank you, John. We'll turn to board discussion on this motion, and we've got Mike Louisi first, and then we'll go to Emerson Hasbrook.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to support the motion, and the reason is because I don't want to see the opposite reaction from John Clark if this were not to pass. So that's the reason why I support it, and I'd suggest calling the question on this rather quickly.
Emerson Hasbrook.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Since I was ready to second this motion before you jumped over me and went to John Clark, I obviously support this motion. And in terms of satisfying some of the concerns, here's my glasses right there, satisfying some of the concerns about commercial sector harvesting larger fish, I'll just reiterate what's in the technical committee memo from September 28th relative to this issue. Implementing a more uncertain management option that is designed to have no effect on overall stock productivity increases the uncertainty around the rebuilding probabilities and the impact on the stock without having a positive impact on overall stock productivity. Thank you.
Thank you, Emerson. Additional discussion on the motion. All right, we'll go ahead and call the question. I'll offer a 1-minute caucus. All right, let's call the question. So I'm over on consent, but we'll try one more time. Is there any objection to this motion? Seeing none, motion passes. How about that? All right. Okay, so we're back to commercial measures in the draft document. Are there any additional additions, deletions, any other modifications? Dr. Armstrong.
A question for staff, and I think I know the answer. This now renders the gill net exemption moot. And do we need a motion?
That was already in the motion.
Oh, that was in there.
Passed.
I'm sorry. I'm checking in for a flight. We're going so fast.
All right, so I guess this is a last call for the board for modifications to the document, additions, deletions. Are there any others the board wants to offer? All right, before we, okay, Emerson, go ahead.
No, I didn't mean to interrupt you. It seemed like there were no other additions or deletions, so I was just going to ask if you needed a motion to approve this.
We will in a moment, and I'll reserve that for you to make that motion, Emerson, if you could. But before we do that, seeing no other board action on this, I'd like to offer to the public if there is something that has not been added that you would like to see, not something that you want removed because we've made those decisions, but if there's something missing that the board missed that you would like to comment on for board consideration, please raise your hand in the room and or online, and we'll offer some comment for items that have not been added that you would like to see added. All right, we have one person that would like to comment, and again, this would be for items that are not in the document you would like to see added. So Michael Quinnen, you can please unmute. You have 2 minutes.
Okay, and it's not going to take me 2 minutes, and I also maybe didn't understand the limitation. I actually have a question, clarification on the last motion, which removed the commercial size limit options and the commercial gill net exemption options. Does that also effectively remove the quota reduction option for commercial in the Bay or commercial generally?
No, Michael, it does not. There is still an option for commercial quota reductions. They are just straight up reductions, and they can range anywhere from 0 to 14.5%.
Okay, and so that's where I'm confused, and maybe I will use a few more seconds here, another minute, because my understanding was the only reason for the quota reductions was to adjust for the maximum size limit option. In other words, the maximum size limit would result in less taking of larger fish, more taking of smaller fish, and in order to equalize to make there be no change in the effect, the quota reduction will be required. So if the maximum size limit option is removed,
Michael,
yes.
I can explain. The board at the last meeting added an additional commercial option that looked at straight reductions to the commercial fishery, as well as the maximum size limit option, which also had quota reductions as part of the spawning potential ratio analysis. So what the board did today was remove the maximum size limit options, but held on to the straight up commercial quota reductions.
All right, thank you, Michael. I appreciate that.
Okay.
All right, so I think now, Emerson, we're ready for that motion. Oh, all right, Dave, you go ahead. You have the last word before we try to put a blessing on this document. Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, thank you, Marty. And my questioning in regard to what is the right quota reduction to occur in Chesapeake Bay to actually achieve a 14.5% reduction in landings is something that I think belongs in this document to inform the public on the difference of landings versus quota. I would gladly make a motion, but I look to you all to speak to how we could just include that information and that clarity. Or if you have any questions for me, what I'm trying to achieve. But I do have a motion prepared. I was not able to provide it to staff.
Dave,
So do you want a motion, or is it something staff can add?
Dave, I think we can do our best to add something, but we can't predict what the bay is going to land in any given year. And so I could say, based on last year's landing values, this, to get a 14.5% reduction, you would actually need this amount. But every year your commercial landings change, so it's difficult for us to predict that value and get to provide something.
I'd be comfortable with what you just described, including that clarity to folks, that there is variability, but based on 2022 landings, what is the number of fish or pounds that should be removed in 2024 or 25, because this document may not impact 2024. So I think that what you just described provides the clarity I was seeking, and so I don't feel that I need a motion. Thank you.
We can just add a column to that table.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Dave. Okay, Emerson, back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And while staff is...
Okay, bear with us, Emerson. You're going to have your moment. I promise you. Yeah. All right, so we have Patrick Paquette online. Patrick, we're not sure when you entered the queue, but we're going to give you the benefit of the doubt. Are you intending to suggest to the board that we add a component to this draft?
I am.
Okay, so go ahead. We'll give you 2 minutes. 1 minute, if you could, please, Patrick.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Patrick Paquette, Mass Striped Bass Association, and a member of the Recreational Striped Bass AP. Just in the answer, and I don't know if it was prevented by a motion leading up to this meeting, which is why I hesitated, but I would just like to say that what I believe is missing from this document are options and a serious discussion going out to the public about closed seasons. We are going down the road of the extremely controversial, lead to a lot of ugly places, recreational sub-mode split. And I believe that we should be having the closed season discussion before that or at the same time as that. And that's all. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Patrick. So I think I understand where you're headed with that. So your suggestion is, you would like to see a component added to this document that entertains closed season. So I turn to the board if there's any interest and appetite for doing that. Seeing none in the room, but we have 2 of our board members that are online who would like to comment to this. So I'm going to go to Adam Nowalski first and then Dave Sikorsky second.
Great, thanks very much. So given the discussion that's already occurred about this around the board so far, I'm not sure there's going to be much appetite at this time for development of a specific option. Maybe there's somebody else around the table that would like to prove me wrong, but I've certainly spoken my part in support of examining this idea. So what my request would be is for conversation about the addition of a scoping element to this question as part of the public comment process. And that, if that needs a specific motion, I'd be happy to make that. If there's support for it around the table and staff believes we could just add that as a question to the public here to provide input with, I'd be acceptable to that path forward as well.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just, I guess the question back to Adam is he actually looking for something to be added into the document, or is it just part of the presentations at public hearings? In other words, we'll go through all the options here, and then, while we've got you, do you guys have any perspectives on closed seasons? And without having, because it gets a little awkward if you're working through an amendment or an addendum with a series of specific options, and then you're asking kind of questions about future things the board might do. It may get really confusing, and it may, some of the public may think, since that question is part of the document, then it can actually be included in what the board does as part of the final approval of that addendum, and the board won't have that ability to put in seasons the way it's written now. So I think weaving something into the public hearings, we could probably do that, but putting it in the document might get a little messy.
And
I would have no objection to the approach of just weaving it into the presentation as such. That would be fine by me if staff feels that's the most appropriate way forward and the rest of the board consents.
And I'll just add that I think based on the past couple of Striped Bass public hearings that we have had in several states, we've utilized the entire time that we have set aside to have those hearings. And so I would want to make sure we set up some expectations that if we are at the end of the time frame to create that comment, is the state wanting to stick around for additional time to scope or not? It's just that we do get a lot of comments typically on striped bass, and I want to make sure that we have the right timing set for that. So it may be that the scope, if you say no, then that scoping would not happen if we run out of time.
And I guess before we clarify what we may or may not do, Dave Sikorsky, did you have a comment?
No, I appreciate Patrick's comments and the discussion so far. I'm supportive, and I feel like I'm in the same place as Adam. So generally speaking, I think this board needs to figure out what our next steps are to address that issue, because there's no question that seasons are what's left in our recreational toolbox. And I think there's actually a seasonality component of commercial fishery constraints as well. I don't know what that path looks like forward, but I don't think it makes sense to add to this document and further complicate our proceedings today or getting things out to the public. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Dave. So I just turn to staff if I could. Can we kind of clarify once, lastly, for the board, so Adam had made a request, working off Patrick Paquette's narrative. So what does that mean in terms of the hearings? And
if it's the pleasure of the board for us to do some scoping at the end of the hearing, I think we can make that happen. But if the hearing has utilized the entire time frame that the state has set aside, then it would be the state hearing officer's choice of whether to scope or not. I'm not going to, I think it would be the state's choice to do that. But this is the pleasure of the board if the whole board wants us to scope or not.
Is there any objection from the board to what Tony's describing? Mike, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with what's been presented regarding seasons. It wouldn't be I'm not going to go get into it at all, but we all know that seasons are next. It is the next thing. If we have to make adjustments, we really don't have anything else left. We're down to one fish. We have slot limits, no wider than that. It's going to be difficult, but my concern is that the public goes to a public hearing to listen to addendum 2 options. And then they have a discussion about season closures. And now they think season closures are part of the options for discussion on addendum 2, which we've already had the debate and removed them. We're going to have time after this is finished in January, I believe, to consider and think about what are the next steps. And I personally would rather see them separated from the conversation with the public. As much as I want to hear what the thoughts are, I just think we try to keep it as simple as we can to get the feedback we need at this time, because January will be here before we know it. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Mike. It doesn't sound like we have board consent to move forward with this unless somebody wants to put a motion forward and try to put it, put something in the form of a motion. Is there any? Adam, you have your hand raised. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's what it's going to take, Mr. Chairman. I will go ahead and make a motion to add to the public hearings time for scoping of closed seasons.
We'll wait. Well, I think everybody understood what that meant, but let's wait a second to get it up on the board.
And I'll just add, while that's coming up, is that this motion would then include time for that, whether we're going to say if the hearing's scheduled to end at 8 o'clock, that at 7:45, that's the time we're going to allow, but that's the intent of this motion, to explicitly allow time for this topic on the agenda of the public hearings.
So to clarify, Adam, you would say cut off comment on the document with 15 minutes left to scope.
No, I'm saying make enough time for the public hearing to accommodate both. I'm not asking to cut anything off. I'm saying if we're going to plan an hour and a half public hearing, let's make it an hour and 45 public hearing. If it's going to be a 2-hour public hearing, let's make it a 2-hour and 15-minute public hearing.
All right. So we have a motion. Do we have a second to that motion? Anyone online?
Dave Sikorsky, are you seconding that? Dave Sikorsky, are you seconding that motion? You're muted if you're speaking. David Sikorsky, are you listening?
I am, but I had to get closer to my mute button. My apologies. I was truly remote away from my computer. Did not know my hand was still up. I am not seconding.
Thank you.
All right. So with lack of a second, that motion doesn't advance. All right. So I think now, Emerson, this is your. Yeah. So I hope everyone in the public knows we care deeply about how you feel. And I think at least in my tenure here, I've been very generous in terms of working with them, but it is my discretion. And in the interest of time, we have a couple other agenda items. We've had opportunity for folks to raise their hand to comment on additions to the document. We had one. So as chair, I'm going to go ahead and cut this off. We're going to take it back to Emerson. And Emerson, this is, you've been waiting patiently, so it's your time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm hoping that staff has a memo, a motion. And while they're getting that motion up, I'd just like to say that I know that people from other states have the opinion that New Yorkers are always trying to do things quickly and are always in a rush. So Marty, it must have been these past 2 or 3 weeks that you've spent in New York that allowed us to get through this contentious document in record time today. I move to approve draft addendum 2 for public comment as modified today.
All right, thank you, Emerson. Do we have a second? Jason McNamee. Is there a need to caucus? Seeing none. All in favor of this? Oh, that's right. I'm going to go 2 for 2 here. Is there any objection to the motion? Seeing none, the motion passes by consent. Thank you all for your patience. Yeah, and so Tony has something she'd like to offer to the board before we move to our next agenda item.
Since we did just discuss seasons, sorry, Chris, to jump the gun. I'll just note that today during the action planning session, I noted that the TC is going to do some additional work to look at the bag and size limit analyses to see if there are ways that we can improve those analyses to give better advice to the board. Katie and I had discussed maybe there is some additional work that the TC could do for seasons. If that is the will of the board, we can try to look into some season concerns. If you want the TC to do so at that time, if not, we will stick with the bag and size limit analyses.
Thank you, Tony. Next up on our agenda.
Does the board want us to do that or not?
Go ahead, Emerson.
I'd like to see that occur. Do you need a motion, or is just our opinion good enough?
Unless anybody has some great objection, we'll have the TC look into some of it, see what we can do. I'm not making grand promises, but.
All right, so we have board consent for that. All right, thank you, Tony. All right, so the next item on our agenda is an update on the Albemarle Roanoke Atlantic Striped Bass Management. Chris Bat-Savage.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, in the brief material is a memo just kind of highlighting the current status and management changes for the Albemarle Sound striped bass stock. I'll just give a quick overview of what's going on with them. Just as a reminder, the Albemarle Roanoke striped bass stock is managed by North Carolina under the backing of ASMFC. The stock is jointly managed by the North Carolina Marine Fisheries Commission and the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission under Amendment 2 to the North Carolina Estuarine Striped Bass Fishery Management Plan. The Marine Fisheries Commission has management authority in Albemarle Sound and its tributaries, while the Wildlife Resources Commission has management authority in the Roanoke River and its tributaries. The North Carolina Division of Marine Fisheries conducts stock assessments for striped bass in this area, and DMF and the Wildlife Resources Commission both monitor the fisheries. The 2020 stock assessment determined that the striped bass stock was overfished and overfishing was occurring. The 2022 stock assessment update showed that the stock status was the same, but fishing mortality increased and spawning stock biomass decreased. The stock assessment results were consistent with the trends in the fishery independent surveys for both the juvenile and adult striped bass, with juvenile recruitment estimates at very low levels the last several years. The striped bass total allowable landings from 2021 through 2023 were set at roughly 51,000 pounds, with 50% allocated to the commercial fishery and 50% allocated to the recreational fishery, with the recreational allocation evenly split between Albemarle Sound and Roanoke River management areas. The 2022 stock assessment update determined that a total allowable landings level of 8,349 pounds is needed to end overfishing. The Division of Marine Fisheries is very concerned about the 6 consecutive years of poor juvenile recruitment, and 2023 appears to be another poor year. About 500,000 1 to 2 inch juvenile striped bass were stocked in Western Albemarle Sound this year, and stocking will continue for at least the next 3 years to address the low juvenile recruitment. In addition, roughly 8,300 pound total allowable landings under the allocations in the North Carolina striped bass FMP is effectively too low to manage. So therefore, the Division of Marine Fisheries will implement a harvest moratorium in the Albemarle Sound Management Area starting in 2024 under the Adaptive Management Framework in the North Carolina Estuary and Striped Bass FMP. In addition, the 2023 fall recreational and commercial seasons in the Albemarle Sound Management Area will not open because there's little quota remaining and because of stock status concerns. It is currently unknown if the Wildlife Resources Commission will implement a harvest moratorium in the Roanoke River Management Area, although the Wildlife Resources Commission is required to implement the moratorium under the FMP. We believe that a complete moratorium that includes the recreational fishery on the Roanoke River in the spring is necessary for stock rebuilding. And I will inform the board of any future management changes for this stock if there are any. So this concludes just a brief update as far as what's happening down here with striped bass. Mr. Chair, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Wrong button. Okay, it's getting late. All right, thank you, Chris. I appreciate that. Are there any questions for Chris? John Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for that update, Chris. Just curious about the stocking. Are the brood stock coming out of the Albemarle and Roanoke, and how successful has that been? Is this the first time you've done this, or is this something you've had success with?
So I don't know the specifics of that, but if it's okay, if I could turn to Chad Thomas. Chad's been, well, in his previous career was a striped bass biologist in North Carolina, but is also involved in the current stocking program. We did stock striped bass decades ago when the stock was under recovery, but it's been a long time since then. But if it's okay, I can turn to Chad to maybe answer those questions.
Thank you, John. Great question. So the genetics are from Roanoke River. So the brood stock were collected from the Roanoke. There were two treatments in 2023. The first was a treatment of 1.5 million fry that were genetically distinct from the 650,000 juveniles that were stocked in June. So those treatments will continue in 2024 and 2025. There are some thoughts of perhaps doing phase 2 stockings as well that will also be genetically distinct. So each treatment is being able to be evaluated separately. And again, this multi-year restoration strategy is not intended to do anything except jumpstart the moratorium actions.
All right, any other questions for Chris or Chad? All right, so we're on to our final agenda item, other business. Is there any other business to bring before the board? David Borden.
And this is a quick point, Mr. Chairman. Over the past couple of years, we've been trying to deal with a number of variables. One of them is recreational catch and release mortality. And I'm a little bit uneasy where we stand with it. And I realize based on the last couple of years that it's a difficult issue for the board to get a head around on what the options are and what the potential impacts are. So my suggestion or request would be for the chair and vice chair basically to confer with the staff and any other board member between now and the next meeting and try to winnow down a few options so that the board could consider how to take that issue up in the future. Thank you.
I'll turn to staff, to look to Tony to see if there's a way to address David's comments.
So David, if it's just the job of the chair and the vice chair, I always say, great, go right on ahead and have those conversations. But if it's the job of staff, between now and that January meeting, and Emily is just coming back online, I don't want to promise that we'll be able to have a full report to you. I'd like to have the option to have that report in May, if I may. If that would be okay, then I think we could do that. But I don't want to commit to Marty and Megan's time to be able to provide a report in January or not. I'm just a little worried about public hearings, additional work that is going on with Cobia. And Emily won't be full-time when she comes back. She's going to be at reduced hours. So I just want to set some expectations of what can get done.
Yeah, go ahead, David.
I think that's fine, and that also might align with the study that Massachusetts is doing currently, where we would have some of the results from that might have a bearing on the issue. So thank you very much.
All right, thank you, David. Any other business to bring before the board? Whoops, oh, God, I'm sorry. We're having a spectacular end here, Tony. All right, Tony has some process characterization here for us for the draft.
So we'll make the changes to the document, hopefully have the document out either the end of next week or early into the following week. Emily will be reaching out to figure out who wants to have public hearings. You'll either see myself or Emily in your state to conduct those public hearings or have a virtual hearing. We're happy to do those still if you like them. We'll try to have at least one virtual hearing that out there. So if there is one state that wants to have one, we like to do that to provide that opportunity to those who can't get to a state hearing or they're just not available on the evening that your state is or jurisdiction is having a hearing. And then we'll bring back comments at the January meeting.
All right, thanks, Tony. I always seem to miss that at the end of one of these addendums or amendment processes. So if there's no other business to come before this board, this is the last meeting for me. I had the privilege to chair this species board. And I'd just like to thank the staff and the leadership of the commission for the opportunity. It's a huge privilege to chair any of the boards, but particularly this one, the flagship. Like a lot of people sitting around the table, I have a long history and a deep connection to the species. And I know everyone else does too. But it was an immense privilege and an honor to guide these discussions, and I hope we're guiding them in the right direction. As the old saying goes, with striped bass at least, there's always going to be pain, uncertainty, and constant work, and that will continue. And I can't think of a better person to take over than my esteemed colleague, Megan Ware from the state of Maine. She'll be your board chair come this February. So I just want to thank everyone and thank the staff for your incredible work. You're awesome. This meeting is adjourned.
Thank you so much, Marty.